Hi there, I'm Brother Merrill, and this is Sunshine for the Soul Inspirational Stories. I appreciate you watching. Please go to our Facebook page or group. You can share the videos there quite easily. It's found on Facebook at Sunshine for the Soul Inspirational Stories. I have several stories today. Sister Robinson from the Orem Temple Presidency shared with us in our devotional a few weeks ago, and she gave me permission to share this story. Her father was one of 8 boys raised on a farm in southern Oregon, in Lakeview. They were a hard-working family that struggled to make ends meet, but he was active socially. He was active in his sports. He played football and basketball and was described as a scrappy player. He was voted the least likely to go to college in his graduating class because of his family's financial situation. As he graduated from high school, World War II was still going strong. He joined the military, but before he was deployed to the South Pacific, the war ended. So he returned home after his service, was active socially in the small town of Lakeview, and it's quite isolated in southern Oregon, and he met a young lady and began to court her, and they began to fall in love. They both wanted him to go on a mission, but his family didn't have the means to support him in that endeavor. And the love of his life, that later became his wife, agreed that she would work and support him while he served. They talked about it at length, and she assured him that she could do it. She was a spunky and hardworking young lady, and so they turned in his papers and agreed that they would get married after his mission. He waited for his call, and he waited for his call, and months went by. And finally, they decided that something had happened and that the call wasn't going to come, so they went ahead and got married. And 6 weeks after they were married, guess what came? The call to serve in the Southern States mission. But they were married. However, in those days, people went on missions after they were married. So they discussed it with their bishop, with their parents, and his wife agreed that she would work while he served his mission. So he left for the Southern States. And his wife stayed home and worked hard and went to school. When she finished her senior year and graduated from high school, she was 6 months pregnant. They had talked about it before he left and decided that the Lord was in charge and that he knew what he was doing when he called him. And so he stayed on his mission and fulfilled a full calling. When he got home, he met his son for the first time, and he was 14 months old. But they were a hard-working, industrious couple and decided that he needed to go to college. They had the GI Bill, and so he went to school and graduated. He had 5 children and a teaching certificate. He worked hard, and they bought a home, but they soon realized that it would be a real struggle to get by on a teacher's salary, and thought it was best if he could go back to school and get his master's degree. However, they didn't have student loans back in those days, and he just couldn't see a way that he could go to college. He obviously had great taste in his companion, and he also had great taste in automobiles. They had a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. They used it for their daily transportation, and soon he was called to be the branch president in a small town about 15 miles away. So his Sundays became very busy. But he would get up early and go to the presidency meetings. He'd stay for priesthood and Sunday school, and he'd come home and have an early dinner, and then he would take the whole family, all 7 of them at that point. They'd climb into that beautiful 57 Chevy, and they'd make their way to the town where he was branch president. It was dark one evening in the winter as they drove out to the branch, and as they came to the top of a hill, they were met by a drunk driver who was passing a car illegally coming the other direction. And just before the car hit them, he said, "Mother, we're going to hit." And he swerved to the right, and the car was struck on his side of the car. They went off the road. It was a serious accident. The car was totaled. All 7 of them had to go to the hospital, but miraculously, no one was seriously injured. To save money, they had changed insurance companies. They didn't realize that the grace period of the policy was still in force, and they began their insurance with another company. So when they got paid for that beautiful car, they got 2 insurance payouts for a totaled vehicle. And so they were able to use that extra money to go back to college, and he got his master's degree in education. Sister Robinson said of this, "My parents were covenant keepers and served in the church all of their lives. They taught their children that things would work out in the end when we seek to do God's will. I was 4 years old when the accident happened, and I still remember many things from that chaotic night. But through the accident, the Lord enabled my dad to continue his education, so he would have the resources to serve in 7 bishoprics, serve as a temple worker in 3 different temples, serve 2 more missions, and send 6 of his 7 children on missions." So sometimes our trials and catastrophes come to us, but become blessings as we push through them. The next story I want to share is from Hugh B. Brown. And I love Hugh B. Brown. If you have not ever heard him talk, he is a dynamic, energetic speaker with charisma, and he's so engaging. You can listen to several of his talks online. There's a Profile of a Prophet, God is a Gardener, and several other talks that are just fantastic. And he has a wit and a way about him that's just engaging. I'd like to read primarily a story of his just because the way he talks is so wonderful. "I was asked to come down from Canada at a time when I was drilling oil wells, a time when I thought I was almost a millionaire, a time when it looked like nothing could save me from becoming a millionaire, and I didn't want to be saved. I awoke one morning about 3 o'clock. Mornings come early up in Canada in the summertime. I was in a little cottage up in the Canadian Rockies. I was worried and bothered. I got out of bed, dressed, and went up to the mountains, far back in the hills, remembering that the Savior often went to the mountains for his communications with his Father. When I got up to the mountains on top of a peak, I was all alone. I removed my hat, and in a loud voice I said, 'Oh God, are you there? You know that I'm about to be a millionaire, or I think I am. Father, if it's not to be good for me and my family, don't allow it to happen. If it is going to rob my family of their faith, don't allow it.' I talked to him as a man would talk to another man. I didn't seem to get an answer, and I stayed up there a long time. When he got home, he told his wife, 'Honey, I'm not feeling like dinner tonight, and I'm afraid I'm going to have a fitful night. You stay in the front bedroom. I'm going to stay back here in the back of the house.' That's what he said. I went into that bedroom and closed the door, and I was conscious of a blackness such as I had never known. There was something in that room that made me feel very sincerely like I could be rubbed out, like I would cease to be. I spent the night in that attitude, in that aura of awful blackness. Early in the morning, Sister Brown came in, and she had heard me walking the floor. When she closed the door, she said, 'My goodness, my dear, what is in this room?' And I said, 'The devil is in this room, and he is trying to destroy me.' We knelt together at the side of the bed and prayed for guidance and deliverance. We didn't seem to get it. The next morning I went down to the office. It was Saturday, and I knew no one would be there, and I could be alone. I knelt down and pleaded with God for deliverance from that awful blackness that was still on my soul. And it seemed to me that the sun came up. I obtained peace of soul and serenity of spirit. I phoned Sister Brown and told her everything's going to be all right. I don't know what happened, but it's all right. That night I was taking a bath." And then he explains that the English don't bathe every night or shower. Once a week they take a bath. And it was Saturday night, and he took a bath. The phone rang and his wife came to the door and said, "Salt Lake is calling." And he said, "Who in the dickens wants to talk to me at this time of night?" It was 10:30. He went to the phone and said, "Hello." And the voice on the other end said, "This is David O. McKay." "Yes, President McKay." President McKay said, "The Lord wants you to give the balance of your life to the church. Tomorrow will be the closing session of conference. Can you get here in time for the afternoon session?" Brother Brown explained that there were no planes flying at that point, that he would get down there as quickly as he could. I hung up, and that night, this was the night following the night of blackness in our lives, Sister Brown and I spent another wakeful night, but it was a night of bliss, because the God of heaven had reached out 1,200 miles and touched a man on the shoulder and said, "Come." I told President McKay when I came down 30 days later about this experience, and he said, "As far as I know, every man who is called into the general authorities has to wrestle with the devil. You have a lot of courage if you came out victorious." I had an experience that I'd like to share. In 1982, I was struggling to readjust my life as I had become a single parent and had gone through a divorce. I was trying to negotiate life and was making some good decisions and some decisions that weren't quite so good. A good friend of mine invited me to go hear a band that I enjoy. It was Fabulous Thunderbirds. Jimmy Vaughn was their guitarist, and he's the younger brother of Stevie Ray Vaughan, who's considered one of the greatest rock guitarists of all time. They were playing up in Park City, and the problem was they were playing in a bar. We were actually mission companions. We decided as long as we didn't drink, we could go up there and enjoy the music. So we went up, and it was a great concert. It was a small venue, and they were a great band, Texas swing rock, and I really enjoyed it. And I met a lot of people. I met a guy that was getting ready to go climb Mount Everest, and several other people that had similar interests that I had. I really felt like I'd kind of opened some new doors. The following Monday, I had to travel out to Vernal, Utah. It was in December. I had a huge Bosch hammer drill in the back of the car. I was in a little Volkswagen Rabbit. I had over 100 pieces of 2-foot rebar, half-inch. And as I was going up Daniels Canyon, the car next to me began to fishtail, and that caused me to fishtail, and I went back and forth a few times, and then I straightened out, and right directly in front of me, maybe a car length away, was one of the largest production cars ever made, a 1967 Buick Electra, and it was right on me. And we hit, I didn't have my seatbelt on, and that rebar flew around the car like darts, and the drill hit the passenger seat and bent it at a 90-degree angle in the back. And fortunately, I was not impaled by any rebar, or my back wasn't broken by this drill. I was pinned in the car as the engine came forward, and the car crushed around me. Some truckers that were surveying the situation after the accident looked in the shattered window that wasn't there and said, "Well, he ain't going to make it." The other guy said he didn't have a chance. And I had 2 huge cuts that came down. My eyelids were slashed open. You could see my eyes when my eyelids were closed. My jaw was smashed, broken in 14 places. There were jaw bones sticking out the bottom of my chin and inside my mouth. And I began to feel liquid in my boot. And I looked down, and I could see the bones of my lower leg sticking out of my pants. And the tibia and fibula were compound fractures. And I realized I was bleeding out pretty quick. Got some assistance and made a tourniquet and cranked it up on my leg, and then I sat there for over an hour until the medics were able to cut the door on the car and pull it open and bring me out of the car and take me to Heber City. When I got there, they were struggling to keep me alive. I received 3 pints of blood while I was there, and the doctor was probably an old military man because he was barking orders and directions to everyone, and he yelled at one of the nurses to crank the valve open all the way. on the blood feed, and she must have closed it all the way, because all of a sudden I went into catatonic shock, and everything went, and all I could see was just a little spot in front of me, and everything seemed to be really far away. I could hear that doctor screaming and yelling instructions and yelling at this nurse, and she opened it back up, but I was pretty far gone. They loaded me in an ambulance once they felt I was somewhat stable, and I took one wild ride from Heber down to Provo. They quickly took some x-rays of my situation. They shopped me to a bunch of different doctors. I needed a cardiologist. I needed a respiratory specialist. I needed a maxillofacial surgeon. I needed an orthopedic surgeon. They got all these doctors to put me back together, and as I was wheeling into the operating room, I had a visitation. All of a sudden, we were somewhere else. And I was asked, "You don't want to go through all this pain. Do you want to die? Do you want to come back?" My dad had passed away. I had a lot of loved ones on the other side, and I said, no, I want to live. So I was asked, why? Why do you feel you should go back to Earth? And the only thing that came to my mind was that I had not been allowed to be the father and the grandfather and the husband that I knew I could be. And as soon as I had those thoughts to explain my reasoning, it was gone. I woke up in intensive care, but the Lord had reached into my life at a pivotal moment when I could have made decisions that would take me down a road that the Lord did not want me to go down. He didn't take my free agency, but he gave me a clarification that allowed me to look at my life and make some better decisions. And the Lord does that in our lives. Sometimes what seems like a terrible catastrophe can actually be a blessing in our life. I have another story I'd like to tell. It's related by President David O. McKay. There was a Sunday school class down in Springville, Utah, and they were discussing the wisdom of sending the Martin and Willie handcart companies at the late season that they were allowed to leave. The general consensus of the class is that it was a mistake and that they should have been kept in Council Bluffs until the spring. And then from the back of the room, an old man stood up and said, "I ask you to stop this criticism. You are discussing a matter you know nothing about. Cold historical facts mean nothing here, for they give no proper interpretation of the questions involved. Mistake to send the handcart companies out late in the season? Yes, but I was in that company, and my wife as well. We suffered beyond anything you can imagine, and many died of exposure and starvation. But did you ever hear a survivor of that company utter a word of criticism? Not one of that company ever apostatized or left the church, because every one of us came through with an absolute knowledge that God lives, for we became acquainted with him. I have pulled my handcart when I was so weak and weary from illness and lack of food that I could hardly put one foot in front of the other. I have looked ahead and seen a patch of sand or a hill slope and have said, I can only go that far, and there I must give up, for I cannot pull the load through it. I have gone on to the sand or the hill, and when I reached it, the cart began pushing me. I have looked back many times to see who was pushing my cart, but my eyes saw no one. I knew that the angels of God were there. Was I sorry I chose to come by handcart? No, neither then nor any minute of my life since. The price we paid to become acquainted with God was a privilege to pay, and I am thankful that I was privileged to come in the Martin Handcart Company. Sometimes from the outside view, what can look like a terrible disaster in someone's life is actually a point of clarification that brings them a knowledge that cannot be gotten any other way. I have another story from Hugh B. Brown that's a wonderful story. He served in the military in World War I, and as he served, he had a good friend, and This is what he says about a situation. I had a companion, a fellow officer, who was very rich, highly educated. He was a lawyer, had great power, and was self-sufficient. He said to me, as we often talked of religion, there is nothing in life that I would like I cannot buy with my money. And they were serving in France, and they were asked to go into a town in France that was still under siege. It had been evacuated, and when they got to the town, they noticed that one particular cathedral seemed to have been the target of a lot of the fire that had been offered by the enemy. And this is what he said. We made our way to that cathedral and went in. There we found a little woman kneeling at the altar. We paused, respecting her devotion. Then shortly she arose, wrapped a little shawl around her frail shoulders, and came tottering down the aisle. There was a man with us who spoke French quite well, and he said, "Are you in trouble?" And she straightened out her shoulders, pulled in her chin, and said, "No, I'm not in trouble. I was in trouble when I came in here, but I left it there at the altar." And he said, "Well, what was your trouble?" And she said, "I received word this morning that my 5th son has given his life for France. Their father was first, and then one by one all of them have gone. But straightening out more, she said, I have no trouble. I have left it there because I believe in the immortality of the soul. I believe that men will live after death, and I know that I shall meet my loved ones again." When that little soul went out, there were tears in the eyes of the men who were there. The one who had said to me that he could purchase anything with money turned to me and said, "You and I have seen men in battle display courage and valor that is admirable, but in all my life I've never seen anything to compare with the faith and fortitude and courage of that little woman." Then he said, "I would give all the money I have if I could have something of what she has." And that is truly the beauty of the gospel, to know the things that we know. I have one more story. It's about a very colorful individual, Golden Kimball, and there's a lot of stories about him. Most of them aren't true, but he was quite a colorful man. When he was 15 years old, his father, Heber C. Kimball, passed away, and it fell on him to support his mother. And so in the 1860s, he became a mule skinner, which in today's terminology, he was a trucker. And there were a lot of federal people still in Utah coming and going, and so he began to run with really rough people. And he developed the language of a trucker. He was called in 1892 to be a general authority. And he was the man that got things done. He had quick wit. He was not afraid of a challenge or a confrontation. And he quite often took a peculiar route to solve a problem. He was disappointed when they put in all the electrical communication systems and said that it wasn't fair because word of what he had said in St. George would beat him back to Salt Lake before he could tell the brethren his side of the story. One time when he was down in St. George, there'd been problems between the stake president and the elders quorum presidencies in the stake, and there'd been kind of a revolution. And these elders quorum presidents had said, "We're not going to do that," whatever it was this stake president wanted them to do. So they sent Brother Kimball down to straighten it out. When he got to the meeting house for the stake conference on Sunday morning, there was hardly a soul there. And he turned to the stake president and he said, "What's going on? There's nobody here." And he said, "Oh, there's a championship baseball game between our hometown and this other town as part of our stake, and so all the stake members are down at this baseball game." Jay Golden picked up his books and he walked out the door, and stake president followed him, and they drove down to the baseball diamond, and Jay Golden looks at the situation, and he walks out onto the pitcher's mound and preaches his sermon. And then when he was finished, he said, "Play ball." And that's the way he was. But he was known to cuss. And it became more and more and more of a problem as communications got more involved, as radio broadcasts were developed and conference was broadcast, because everybody knew that when Jay Golden spoke, you were probably going to have some colorful language. And he became kind of the common man's favorite because he could really understand and relate to the common man. Shortly before the April conference in 1938, President David O. McKay called Brother Kimball into the office, and he'd been told this a lot of times, but he was told, "You have got to quit swearing in conference. It's just not appropriate. It's being broadcast, it's being recorded. It's been revealed to me, Brother Kimball, if you swear in conference this April, it will be the last conference you speak in because you won't live for another conference." Jay Golden swore in conference in April in 1838. I don't know what he said, but I can well imagine. Shortly after, he was given several assignments, and one of them was out in Winnemucca. And as he was making his way back from Winnemucca, he went off the road and rolled several times. And as they pulled him out of the car, he said, "What a hell of a way to die." And those were the last words of J. Golden Kimball. And I tell that story because all of us have obstacles to overcome in our lives. And sometimes they can seem insurmountable. But the Lord will guide us and help us. In 2006, we lost our daughter, Jannie. I was talking with my cousin who had just lost his father. And I told him, "I know you'll see your father again." And he said, "I wished I had your faith." And I looked at Kirk and I said, "It's not faith, it's not hope, it's not a belief. I know that I will see my daughter and my loved ones on the other side of the veil. I know that life continues after this. I know that our Heavenly Father guides and directs our lives, and that things that might seem from the perspective of time to be catastrophic or problematic are frequently stepping stones of growth that allow us to acquire the knowledge that we need in this life." So whatever you've done, wherever you are in life, take the Lord as your companion. Reach out to Him. Kneel down and speak with the Lord. Ask Him to give you guidance. You may not receive an immediate answer, but you will feel His hand guiding and directing your life. And you will know that Heavenly Father loves you and is there watching over you. I hope you've enjoyed this story today. You can subscribe here. You might enjoy this story also. You can watch all the Sunshine for the Soul stories here. Thank you.